Chapter 1. Immediate divergence. It doesn't begin with tanks crossing a border. It begins with a vote that lands like a door slamming. After a crisis on NATO's eastern edge, the alliance meets, argues, and fails to agree on what it is even promising anymore. One government calls it an incident. Another calls it an attack. And a third says out loud what leaders have only whispered for years. If we are forced to choose between escalation and restraint, we choose restraint. The statement is meant to calm their voters. Instead, it detonates the one thing NATO cannot survive without: assumption. For decades, deterrence has been a story everyone repeats until enemies start believing it too. Now the story has a visible crack. Washington tries to patch it with language. European capitals try to patch it with urgent phone calls. The Secretary General tries to patch it with a press conference that sounds confident and feels thin. Then the markets do what markets always do when trust gets punctured. They price the fear immediately. Bond yields jump in the countries closest to the front line. Insurance rates spike for ports, pipelines, and data centers. A rumor that used to be dismissed as propaganda becomes a rational question. What happens if the alliance hesitates again? Inside NATO headquarters, the next emergency meeting is not about the adversary. It is about the allies. A handful of governments demand stronger commitments, faster deployments, clearer red lines. A handful demand the opposite, terrified of being dragged into a war they did not choose. Every compromise sentence gets longer. Every "we will" turns into "we may." And the world notices the difference. The divergence is simple. NATO does not collapse in flames. It collapses in public, one careful word at a time, until the treaty still exists and the guarantee does not. Chapter 2. Short-term consequences. The first consequence is speed. Not on the battlefield, but in the behavior of everyone watching. Russia tests airspace more aggressively, not because it wants a major war, but because it wants proof that fear has moved from one side to the other. Hybrid attacks spread like mold. A sabotage incident at a rail junction. A mysterious fire at a warehouse. A cyber disruption that targets emergency services and then vanishes. Each event is deniable. Together they become a message. You are alone enough to hurt. In Europe, governments scramble to show strength without admitting panic. They announce new defense spending. They accelerate procurement. They draft new readiness plans that look impressive on paper and still depend on supply chains that can't sprint. The hardest part isn't buying equipment. It's rebuilding certainty. Because certainty used to be imported. It came with American logistics, American intelligence, American air power, and an American president who could tell allies in one sentence that the question was already answered. Now every capital has to answer for itself, and every answer is different. Poland and the Baltic states harden their borders and deepen their ties with whoever will commit quickly. Germany debates faster, louder, and more painfully than it has in generations. France offers leadership and expects deference in return. The United Kingdom offers capability and expects influence it can no longer assume. Turkey plays its own game, measuring leverage in both directions and smiling through the ambiguity. The United States tries to hold the center by sending more forces, then pulling them back, then sending them again. The inconsistency is not always policy. Sometimes it is politics. In an alliance built on long memory, short election cycles become a weapon. Then the first ally makes the move that turns doubt into structure. A country near the front line signs a bilateral defense pact with a neighbor and quietly tells everyone it will treat that pact as more reliable than a multilateral promise. It is practical, it is understandable, and it is contagious, because once a few allies start building lifeboats, the ship stops feeling unsinkable. Chapter 3. Medium-term instability. The second year is when the collapse becomes real, not as a declaration, but as a new operating system. NATO meetings still happen. The flags are still there. but the conversations shift from planning together to comparing risks separately. Military staffs stop assuming shared command. They start writing plans that work, even if others do not show up. The most dangerous change is quiet. Strategic patience disappears. When everyone believes backup is guaranteed, they can afford restraint. When everyone doubts it, they reach for speed, preemption, and hard edges. Border incidents become louder. Jets fly closer. Warships shadow longer. Warnings turn sharper because no one wants to look weak in front of their own people. The alliance used to absorb these shocks. Now the shocks land directly on national nerves. Inside Europe, politics fractures along a line that used to be muted by the guarantee. Some parties argue for accommodation, dressed up as realism. Some argue for militarization, dressed up as survival. Both accuse the center of betrayal. Every election becomes a referendum on fear, and fear is a terrible architect. Then comes the question no leader wants to answer on camera. If the shield is unreliable, do we build our own? Nuclear sharing, once a technical arrangement, becomes a public argument. Rumors of European deterrence spread through parliaments and think tanks. Officials deny. Then they commission studies. Then they stop denying as forcefully. The proliferation taboo doesn't shatter overnight. It erodes the way coastlines erode. Slowly, and then all at once. Meanwhile, the adversary doesn't need to conquer territory to win. It only needs to keep Europe in a permanent state of mobilized anxiety. Because anxiety is expensive. It drains budgets, it drains cohesion, it drains the future. And by the time leaders realize what has happened, they discover a brutal truth. The alliance wasn't only a military machine. It was a system for preventing allies from turning their weapons inward toward each other's distrust. Chapter 4: Long-term global changes. Over time, the world reorganizes around the absence. New blocks form, but they don't look like the old one. They are smaller, more transactional, more conditional. Guarantees come with clauses. Clauses come with loopholes. Everyone learns to read the fine print like it is a survival manual. Europe attempts to build a unified defense structure, but unity is harder without the external anchor. Some states push for a shared army. Others refuse, afraid of losing sovereignty to save it. The result is a patchwork. High capability here, gaps there. Overlapping command chains that work in peacetime and tangle in a crisis. Across the Atlantic, the United States discovers that walking away does not reduce obligations. It only changes their shape. It is forced to return again and again, not as a leader of a stable alliance, but as an emergency responder to a continent that keeps catching sparks. In Asia and the Middle East, partners watch and adjust. Some hedge by buying more weapons. Some hedge by making deals with rivals they once avoided. Some hedge by building their own deterrents, because the lesson feels universal. Promises fade, capabilities remain. So capabilities become the only language that matters. Trade follows security. Investment follows predictability. Once NATO was the background hum that made long-term planning feel safe. Without it, the hum becomes a siren. The world doesn't become multipolar in a clean academic way. It becomes multipolar in the way a city becomes darker when streetlights fail. You can still walk. You just walk faster, looking over your shoulder, and you stop taking routes you used to enjoy. Chapter 5: Final Outcome. The final cost of NATO's collapse isn't a single invasion. It's a chain reaction in how states think. When the alliance was intact, countries could afford to specialize. They could trade efficiency for collective strength. When it breaks, every country is pushed towards self-sufficiency in security, and self-sufficiency is a luxury most cannot truly afford. So they compromise. They build partial shields. They buy partial deterrents. They accept partial risks. And partial risks are the ones that slip through. Years later, a crisis erupts that would once have been contained by an automatic response. This time, it becomes a negotiation under pressure. A corridor is closed. A border is tested. A city loses power for a night, then a week, because unknown actors, keep finding new ways to reach the same switches. Leaders gather, calculate, and wait for someone else to move first. No one wants to be the spark. No one wants to be the coward. In the delay, the world learns the new reality. There is no longer a single structure that turns aggression into immediate collective consequence. There are only coalitions assembled after the fact when damage has already proven itself real. That becomes the irreversible consequence. Deterrence shifts from prevention to punishment, and punishment always arrives late. In this world, the peace that follows is not stable. It is negotiated repeatedly, like a debt rolled over again and again. The price rises each time, and eventually, the price is paid not in treaties, but in the slow normalization of fear as policy. Because once an alliance collapses, the hardest thing to rebuild isn't the command structure. It's the shared belief that someone will show up before the cost becomes irreversible. Epilogue. The world looks solid until pressure finds the cracks. Then tomorrow becomes unrecognizable. Until next time.